This meeting come to order. Today is Tuesday, June 7, 2016. This is a study session of the Prescott City Council. We have a lot of ground to cover today. We have two important topics coming up right now for the study session, and we have an executive session and a pretty extensive voting meeting starting at 5:30. So I think we'll just get started. Roll call, please.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Ware.
Yes.
Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr. Here. Councilman Schista.
Here.
And Councilwoman Wilcox.
Here.
All present.
Okay. First discussion item.
Item 1A, presentation and overview of the Walden Ranch Development Project, a 286-lot single-family subdivision, APN 106-01-005, 106-01-003X, 102-06-005, property owner James 110 Investments, LLC, PP 15-001.
Good afternoon, Mayor. This is a presentation and an overview of a proposed development that will be coming before you for action in the near future. It's, as with many large developments, fairly complex because there are a number of steps involved in the process, and we wanted to take an opportunity and walk you through those steps in a brief presentation today before we move on to formally putting on an agenda for you to take action. So just a little background, I'll show you exactly where the property is in a moment, but just to give you an idea of what went on associated with it, it was annexed into the city in 2006. It came in from the county with zoning for residential development with 18,000 square foot lots. Once annexed into the city, it was rezoned to 3 different zoning districts. One was the city's equivalent of 18,000 square foot single-family lots. The other was a large lot subdivision type of development called rural estate, 2-acre. So they're 2-acre minimum lots. And then a large portion of it was zoned business regional to allow for commercial along a connected roadway. There was also a development agreement and a water service agreement. The water service agreement and development agreement lapsed a number of years ago. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is there are many moving parts or many parts to this process. So just to give you a general idea of why we're doing the review this afternoon, there is a general plan amendment, an airport-specific area plan amendment, rezoning to change the various zonings to single-family 6 to allow smaller lots and open space. Then there's a subdivision plat, and then there is another development agreement and a new water service agreement to cover the current design and proposal.
George, just so I understand, can you go back? In 2006, the council adopted a plan for 27 homes, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, 2-acre.
2-acre lots.
And then during the general plan, we, as a community, rezoned that area?
We amended the general plan to accommodate the property coming in through an annexation because it wasn't covered. And then we also rezoned it to match local city zoning plus what was requested by the developer, which included the very large lots and the business regional zoning. Under the county, it would only have allowed single families.
So the 215 lots are the same, it involves the same space of land, the same amount of land? No.
This is the location of the property involved. The annexation took all of that in, and the original proposal with the original design covered all of that same area. So we're not changing any of the boundaries of the city nor of the subdivision with this proposed new
So in
process.
2006, that amount of land was supposed to have 27 homes on it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So again, the property location, you can see Highway 89A, State Route 89 on the western end, State Route 89A on the northern end. The property is accessed through a subdivision called Center Point West. Larry Caldwell Drive is the primary access. At some point, the subdivision will have connection to State Route 89 on its southwestern edge. So the original general plan for the property is shown on the left. The idea was to create an opportunity for mixed uses which allow commercial and residential. So what you have, I'm going to try using the laser on this. I'm not sure how well it's going to show up. Not very well. The crosshatching you see on the left-hand side is an indication of mixed uses that allow either commercial or residential. The general plan generally does that for the purpose of allowing flexibility with actual zoning. Their proposed change would modify both the area for mixed use and an area of commercial use in the northeast edge of the property in question. If you look on the map to the right, that area that used to be mixed use is shown all as a light yellow color. That's single-family residential. Let's just allow residential development. On the northeast edge, a large area that used to be designated for commercial development has been shown now as open space in relation to the plat that's been proposed to us. It also involves an amendment to the specific area plan for the airport because the land uses in that document are matched up and need to match up with the land uses in the general plan. So we're making the same change there, would affect the mixed use designation and a piece of the commercial designation. So this shows the existing zoning on the left, that RE2 acre, or the very large lot residential. The red area through the middle of the subdivision is the business regional. That was also the route of the primary connector that would connect 89 to 89A through this subdivision. The thought at the time by that developer was to put commercial along that route because you often want commercial or higher intensity uses along what could be high volume roadways. The proposed changes, and I apologize, I don't have a color version of this for you, but the proposed changes indicate an SF6, which is single family, residential, 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. They can be larger than that, but the minimum is 6,000. And then a fairly significant area of NOS, which is natural open space. It doesn't allow any residential or commercial use of the property. A lot of the area that's shown as NOS on the current plan was originally shown as single family 18 on the original plan. Some of it's in the Granite Creek wash and floodplain, floodway areas and would not be able to be developed, but some of it would be because it's high enough out. It's in an area called a floodplain, which allows development with just minimum finished floor elevation, so there may be some fill necessary to be able to do that. But by changing it to NOS, you're precluding any type of use of that property other than recreational type uses. And this was voluntarily proposed to us by the developer at the time of the original discussion, even prior to going to Planning and Zoning Commission. There was a change recently in the lot layout and lot sizes. Again, this was proposed by the developer, and Mr. Chamberlain is here if you have questions about that part of the process. Those changes were made, but left the primary street layout, the lot layout, and the connectivity points for water, sewer, and streets in the same locations. It is substantially the same design with less lots but slightly larger lots than was what was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission some months ago. Based on that minor amount of change, it does not appear that this should have to go back to Planning and Zoning Commission for any further review. Substantial compliance means it can proceed through the process at City Council.
Excuse me, George, don't lot sizes usually go down rather than go up?
In this particular case, they went up. And again, I don't want to talk for Mr. Chamberlain as to why, but one of the reasons that very often kicks in is market studies. Do people want to buy 6,000 square foot lots, or do they want 9,000 square foot lots? Sure. And if your market is 9,000 square foot lots, then perhaps a larger lot size is more appropriate. And that may have played a part in this. But again, typically what you see are people asking for smaller lots than they actually intend to build because it's easier to make them larger later.
Okay, thank you. One other thing, what is the percentage of open space versus the entire development?
38.
38%.
Okay.
Typically for planned area development, the requirement's 25 as a minimum, and that's per the Land Development Code. So it's significantly larger area of open space, but again, some of that is open space areas that would not have been developable because of the floodway in Granite Creek. So those areas are incorporated and included to give the developer the benefit of the doubt throughout that process.
Thank you.
And that's actually 85 acres, right?
It's a very large area,
large.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So the subdivision plat, again, substantial conformance, no significant changes to any of the layouts. Moving that one forward, the City Council seems appropriate. There was some question about flood boundaries, and this map is very complex, and I apologize, it's difficult to read. What it indicates is the edge of the floodway, which you cannot build in, and the edge of the floodplain, which you can build in as long as you meet minimum finished floor elevations. None of the proposed lots and none of the area of development within this proposed subdivision are in the floodway. They do encroach into areas of floodplain, so some fill will be necessary in some cases, or building elevation above a certain level will be necessary in order to comply with FEMA's regulations, which we're responsible for enforcing through the building permitting process. As I mentioned earlier, there is a development agreement proposed to go along with this property. Just a few of the highlights are there's a fairly significant connection that would occur through the property. I mentioned that earlier. It starts at 89, State Route 89, and works in an L-shaped up to and includes a connection with Center Point West. That right-of-way, because it's a larger arterial or collector roadway, will have a 96-foot wide right-of-way, which is a fairly wide right-of-way. In addition, there is provision being set aside to allow for future right turn lane as necessary for southbound traffic. There is also a public trail easement requirement in order to meet the master plan for our trails throughout the city. They have met that with their design. In addition to that, they've also proposed to create another trail above and beyond our trails master plan, actually in the floodway of Granite Creek, that will make a connection that doesn't currently exist from the west side of Granite Creek to the east side of Granite Creek and allow for pedestrian access there. It actually will provide a nice amenity for the subdivision, as it will allow them connection through. They can get them via an established trail, can get them to the Peavine Trail. The development agreement includes requirements for the owner to provide infrastructure as typical in pretty much all subdivision processes, and they will be responsible for contributing to the city's fair share of construction as to any points of connection with any of the major existing roadways, so Larry Caldwell or 89. In addition to the criteria in the development agreement, there's also a water service agreement that's tied to that, and that water service agreement actually changed somewhat, as I mentioned
I have a question,
before.
George.
Sir.
Question for the city manager. When it comes to the last bullet point, where it says a pro rata share of construction of side road and the connector, what does that truly mean as far as cost? Do you have any idea?
Well, no, not in dollars, but the methodology is just what it says, a pro rata share. It compares the trip generation of this particular proposed development versus other traffic using that intersection. And excuse me, that methodology is described in the text of the development agreement, which is in your packet.
And that would be the same formula that we would use in any subdivision or development?
Generally speaking, that's correct.
This is what I wouldn't call giving it up to the developers. I'd call this a very good development agreement.
So the last item, again, was the water service agreement. The water service agreement has been, the numbers for the water service agreement have been modified to reflect the 215 lots that are now proposed, residential lots that are now proposed, bringing their required amount of acre feet down to 75.95. From approximately 100 in the previous design. None of the other proposed changes associated with those lot sizes really affect any of the other aspects of it. The general plan amendment stays the same. The airport plan stays the same. So the only thing that really changes is the actual subdivision plat and the water service agreement to cover those specific numbers. That was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those. Again, Mr. Chamberlain is here, who may be able to answer questions from the owner's side.
George, I have a question, Mr. Mayor. Where's the water coming from?
Physically or legally?
Is it alternative? Is it?
Yes. Yes,
It's
an
alternative water. Correct. Renewable resource.
Sorry. It's on now. It's on now. I'm new.
Yes, Councilman Blake.
I have a question. It's going to sound like kind of a squirrely question, but it fits me pretty well. You know, we start talking about, and I guess this is for the city attorney, we start talking about developments in the community new, and one thing we never talk about is how we have to service that community once it's brought into the city of Prescott. What I really mean by that is when you start talking about, you know, police service and fire service, two of the services that we're very strapped with, have we ever given it any consideration, or is it legal to give consideration to ask the developer or in the development agreement to provide funding for a new police officer, a new fireman in that development agreement for 1 year? Just a question. The state has us handcuffed to do anything when it comes to providing services outside the scope of anywhere. We can't do anything as far as money for new buildings or anything else, but in an agreement, a development agreement where the property owner agrees to something like that in writing, it may help alleviate some of the pressure that we have.
I agree with that last comment, that generally speaking, unless the development agreement statute prohibits the city and the developer from agreeing to something, then the parties can agree to something. I will say that I can't recall, in my experience, 3 different cities where a developer agreed to pay the operational costs or, you know, an employee cost for something. Normally it's infrastructure or dedicating land, you know, for a school if it's a big subdivision, or for a fire station or a police substation, or even building the building, or you know, dedicating a part of a building to a police or fire substation. So I don't know, you know, sort of off the top of my head, I don't know how one would agree to that other than some sort of just lump sum payment for the cost of a, you know, new police officer, say for instance, whatever that cost is for a year, would be a lump sum payment whereby the city would have to agree to use that lump sum payment for only that thing, only that one thing. So in theory, the parties could agree to something like that. It would be the devil's sort of in the details.
I think it's something that maybe in the future we need to look at as we keep expanding these subdivisions that are outside the city of Prescott and outside the different zones for fire and police. It would make some sense to ask the developer if they would consider a training fee, so what we have to pay $100,000 to train a new officer, a new firefighter. It would take some of that burden off the city of Prescott.
The only sort of concern I would have is that generally, and again, development agreement is a contract, so the parties have more leeway in agreeing to things. But generally speaking, when it comes to land use or development type exactions, there has to be some nexus between what the city asks for and what the developer gives. And I'm not sure, I mean, you'd have to establish that there's some sort of nexus between, you know, over a however many years, phases, these phases, I think 4 phases over 10 to 15 years or more. And so the question would be, what's the nexus between a development that would build 250 homes over, say, a 15-year period and a single year of a police officer? Do these homes necessarily create a demand for an additional police officer? It's a little different if you were to say, we want a police substation in that location, right, for instance. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I just think the times we're in and we're short-strung on stuff, we never get a chance to ask things that are a little bit outside the box. And as we know, that development, whether it's the Dells or whether it has to do with Walden Ranch or it has to do with the next one down the line, it always puts pressure on 2 very important places that we have very limited access to do anything about, and that's police and fire.
And I think that you know, I mean, an argument could be made on the opposite, that a construction sales tax that comes directly from the development of these homes goes into the city's general fund, you know, would sort of contribute to the funding of whatever the council chooses to do. So there's a sort of a better nexus or connection there. But if there's a need to have, I don't know if there is, if there's a need to have some sort of police substation out in the sort of north part of town, than one or more of these development. That's an easier sort of thing to agree to. An actual sort of funding for police officer position, a little iffier. So I'm not going to tell you no, it can't be done, but it would take some looking into.
Take a crafty attorney, correct?
Councilwoman Wilcox?
Thank you, Mayor. Last year, we decided not to impose impact fees for police and fire, and that would fund capital facilities. Because at the time, I think we didn't foresee the need, and we couldn't assure ourselves that we would build something within 5 years as required by law. But as we move forward and we review those impact fees, we may need to take another look as we see the growth occurring north of Prescott.
And I would say that the policy decision to delete public safety infrastructure impact fees from the impact fee ordinance doesn't prohibit the city from getting a developer, agreeing with the developer for a developer to say dedicate a site on a large development for a fire station or a police substation, or even building some facility for the city. In other words, that can be done by agreement irrespective of the idea that we don't have impact fees for it. Now, the pushback may be, well, I as a developer am not creating 100% of the impact, therefore I'll contribute half of that or something like that. But again, because this is a development agreement, there's a lot more flexibility. It all depends on how much the developer wants, how much the city wants, and then the meeting of the minds on a contract. So it can be done, and it's been done before. For instance, some subdivisions require school sites by statute. We don't have those necessarily here. They don't have to build the building, they just have to dedicate a piece of land in a large subdivision to a school. And I've seen it done before where fire station sites or police substation sites or combination sites are dedicated, and the city ends up building a building later on. But usually it builds the building by impact fees.
Councilwoman Orr?
Yeah, I just want to say, I was out for the Final Visions opening that we did several months ago, and what a beautiful area this is in our community. And I think that this would be a great plus. It's gorgeous where that is. And I'm so appreciative of the 85 acres that have been set aside, and 38%. I mean, I think that's huge. And I think that will add again to our trail system. There's just so many amenities that can come from this being added to our community. So I appreciate the work that's gone into it and the creativity. It's quite good. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of thought processes listening. One word comes to mind, I'm a private property rights kind of guy. Never lied about it. One of the words that comes to mind is extortion. A lot of times we seem to want to take advantage of a private property owner. We've done it with our building codes and zoning and stuff where for permission to build on their own property, they got to follow these rules. On the other side of the coin, because somebody does want to develop their private property, doesn't mean they have a right to dump in the laps of everybody else the cost of servicing the property. So I would just share with my fellow council, we need to walk very carefully on what we expect out of people who are willing to invest in this community and have invested in this community and continue to invest in this community, using their property not only to benefit themselves, but to benefit everybody else that's here. So I'll just leave it go at that as we move forward.
Any other questions, comments? I guess I'll have a few final comments. First of all, I think this is a very good project, and I'm looking forward to go forward. As far as, coming up with police and fire, I think that's part of the strategic plan. When we take a look at, right-sizing our organizations, we're looking at a new police chief coming up here shortly. Don't know whether it's going to be male or female. But I would expect that person, he or she, to take a look at their organization, understand, our land use plan, our general plan, understand what we're looking at in, what I call modest growth in this town. And if they feel that they need to have, more assets to be able to provide the critical services, then I would expect them to come to the council and bring that up. And that's something we will have to always look at as we move forward. So I'm not sure that I see pretty much what Councilman Blair was talking about, but there's obviously got to be a very specific process in which we look at how we're going to provide critical services as we do expand into new areas. I did see one hand up out there, and I'll just go ahead and say this is a study session, and we're not going to take any public comment today on these two topics we have. A lot of what's going to be discussed on this development and also on the other subject that we have will come up again later, and there'll be other things that are going to be voted on by the council, and I'll give you opportunity to provide public comment at that time. Is there any other questions or comments on this before we move on? Okay, item B.
Item 1B, update on SR 69 Safety and Widening Improvement Project.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Henry Hash, Public Works. We are here today to give you just a bit of update of SR 69. As you know, SR 69 is a state road, and it is maintained by ADOT. The section of the project we are talking about is approximately 1 mile from Prescott Lake Parkways to the tribe land where the shopping mall is. The 69 highway is maintained by ADOT, but that portion of it is a bottleneck. It goes from 6 lane to 4 lane back to 6 lane. As a result, has been really a very, very unsafe road. Been keeping tracks of all the accidents and crashes for the last 5 years. Prior to that as well. The numbers are incredible. When you talk about 40 or 50 crashes in 5 years is too many, but when you talk over 500, that's quite too many. ADOT does realize this, and they are good partners. But unfortunately, funding has not been included in 2017 to 2021 ADOT 5-year plan. So with the last 2 years, the Prescott office of ADOT, Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization, or SIMPO, Yavapai County, and the city of Prescott have been discussing and trying to find ways to bring this project forward. And I think we have had very, very good discussions on that. So this project would improve traffic operation and safety by removing the 4-lane bottleneck cross-section between the 2 6 lanes and basically correct the whole problem. Been 582 crashes in the last 5 years, 28 wildlife-related crashes, and 4 fatalities. 1 is too many. So ADOT also completed a feasibility report in June 2015, and really does support, the 15% does support the widening of the road. The question is, where does the money come from? So this project would improve the safety and the capacity greatly. Is good economically as long as we do it the right way, as well as traffic volume. Now, in order to move this important regional project towards a timely completion, timely manner, the SIMPO Executive Board has been considering a loan transfer, basically from NACOG to our SIMPO, the amount of $650,000. This loan needs to be paid back in a few years, but it would be a great help for us to get things going. Although the design is not done, the loan would be used for the design of the project. There are different numbers from $7 million to $10 million potentially the cost of construction. If you take the design, the rule of thumb is about 10%, so we may be talking anywhere from $900,000 to $1 million. So the discussion is, in fact, if $650,000 is transferred, the balance of it could be $300,000 or less, will be coming from both equally the city of Prescott and Yavapai County, roughly $150,000 each. Now, if the design money comes less, we'll pay less, but no more than $150,000. Of course,
So Henry, can I,
please.
so let's suppose the design comes in at $800,000. And
Then
650
minus-
comes, I just want to make that clear, 650 will come from SIMPO, and then the balance will be split between the two.
Yes, Councilwoman. Correct. So basically, this is where we are. This is contingent in our proposal is upon State Transportation Board agreeing to put this on the 5-year program. If they don't put in a 5-year program, then local matching will not be available. I mean, in my opinion, it's a good deal for ADOT because really they get about close to $1 million help if they do it now. Chris Bridges, our executive director of SIMPO, has been really, really creative to do this. He is here to answer any questions. Former councilman Chris Cookney was very much supportive of this, and our Councilman Billy Orr, who's a member of the SIMPO executive board, is also very supportive of this. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. I apologize, Mayor. So if you agree and give us a go-ahead, then Mr. Bridges will bring this to the next Transportation Board meeting, telling them the local governments are tentatively in agreement if you do that.
Councilwoman Wilcox?
I mean, I noticed that the ADOT plans were 15% level plans, and there's mention of an 8-foot multi-use trail along the north side of Highway 69. Do you envision that being a separated trail from the highway?
I don't know because the design hasn't really even started yet, but maybe I'll ask Ian Mattingly if he knows, because he has been involved with some of these discussion planning for a few years now.
Good afternoon. Yeah, you know, that is a project assessment, so while it is a 15% design document, it's not to the level where they exactly know what they're going to do. I think one of the things that was critical in bringing forward some of the pathway discussions was the ability of it to continue through the project as we get towards the tribe, you know, at the end of the project. But certainly if it does go forward in the actual design documents, it would be a separated trail with some kind of parkway and move back. But at this point, I don't think ADOT is certain as to whether or not that will actually go forward. It's preliminary.
Okay.
That was a project assessment, you know, a conceptual report. So,
Of course, the reason I asked is that in my observation, just driving along that section of highway, I always see people walking or riding a bike on the wide shoulder, which is full of gravel and broken glass, and it would be so much safer if there were a separated pathway on that high speed.
I think the stakeholders recognize that, and we really see a desire to connect the pathway that was built through the interchange, but there is that gap, and so there will be improvements. It will have vertical curbs, and so it will become a more urbanized section, which would fit with a separated pathway. And so certainly we'll do everything we can to influence that to go forward.
Good, okay.
Councilwoman Orr?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, I had the opportunity to speak at the ADOT meeting, the board meeting, and our effort here is to move this timeline up, because otherwise this will not be done, because it's not in the 5-year plan. So our effort is so if we put up to $1 million on the table, but by we, it's SIMPO, it's the county, it's the city of Prescott, can we in fact get this in the queue and get this moving so we can get this project done sooner? Therefore, I believe it's a great plan to come up with a swap. I know we called it a loan, Henry called it a loan, but it's a swap of funds, and then those funds will be repaid, and we get this project in the design of 2017. Now, for that to happen, they need consensus from all of the players, the city and the county. And so that's what we're asking for today, is that we talk about coming to consensus that, yes, let's agree to doing this so that we can get Highway 69, which is, I would think, probably one of the worst spots in the state. So I do believe that ADOT, and I don't want to assume, Christopher, but I do hope that ADOT will see the need of this. 582 accidents in the last 5 years, 4 fatalities. So that was what we expressed as such a need. So I encourage that our council will support and come to consensus on this.
Councilwoman Wilcox?
John, I had a question. If the council is indicating consensus, are we making a decision, or will this come back to the council for?
Well, it would have to come back to the council to actually enter into some sort of agreement or appropriate the money. It's agendized to,
Next month.
well, if the recommended action talks about presentation for council and council consensus. So you can come to some consensus, but it's not binding, obviously. We have to come back at some later date with some sort of agreement or IGA or appropriation of the 150,000, or of the up to 150,000.
And maybe Henry or Billy, you know the answer to this question. What is the timeline by which we need to indicate our willingness to move forward?
I believe it's today.
Today? Okay.
The reason is, and if I may, I also answer your previous question. This is just a consensus, not your decision. This is not a vote. So, Mr. Chris Bridges, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, can go to State Transportation Board saying that the local governments, the board members, have agreed to participate in the design if you agree to bring the project up within your, so it's very, very preliminary. So, and I believe I said it today because I think Mr. Bridges is going to that meeting very shortly, before your next meeting, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, City Manager, we have concurrence from the council here to move forward on this thing and take whatever actions you need to now and then bring it forward on a future agenda item for a vote. Okay. Any other questions, comments on this? Last item, please.
Thank you.
Item 1C, request for information regarding June 7, 2016 voting meeting agenda items.
Anybody have any questions, comments on the what's coming up at 5:30? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.